All right, so we're on. Good morning. This is the November 10th. I'm with Moein. This is our second conversation. Moein and I spoke about 3 weeks ago or so, and I believe that November 12th was the end of your current cycle. And it begins the on cycle, right? In 2 days.
Yes,
So you're at the tail end of your 41 days off.
that's correct.
Okay. So one of the things we left off on last time, well, there were a bunch of things, and I'll let you guide those as you remember and want to continue to investigate those thoughts and ideas. But one of the things I left off with was noting that you grew up in Tehran, came to the United States and went to school. And your country right now is obviously in a very precarious position and difficult situation, and has been for quite some time. I remember when the original influx of, I don't know if they were exiles or people that were basically trying to escape the new regime of Ayatollah Khomeini, came to Los Angeles in large numbers. And that was back in 1979. And I remember seeing them protesting at the federal building and also developing a community here that has grown. And I think they call Westwood Boulevard, with all the restaurants, the Persian restaurants, Little Persia or something.
Tehran Jealous, they call it.
What is it?
They call it Tehran Jealous.
Tarantulas. Very good. And I know from my own reading and studies and such that the Persian history is rich in not only education, but poetry and engineering, and some of the original buildings that were built at times that nobody considered building 60 and 80 foot tall buildings were built within the Persian Empire, and that engineering has been a very, very common profession within the culture, that mercantilism started largely in Persia, that the roads leading to China and into Europe and all that were centered there, and most of the travel and such was passing through there. So the chance to actually interact on a commercial basis was pretty significant. I don't know what the dates are and all that, but it goes back thousands of years. I also think that, if I remember right, Persia was where zero within mathematics was basically conceived of. Because prior to that, there was no zero, so there was no placeholder, so there was no way to carry numbers, and tablets had to be used with hash marks on them to do all the accounting for grain and any kind of inventory that was being accounted for at the time that was a product. And that was the discovery of zero, not that it wasn't always available, but the human discovery of beginning to concede that this aspect of mathematics existed, I believe, came out of there. And it was a revolution in mathematics, and also, when it was originally conceived of, seen by Europeans and certain cultures as being demonic, because you could take a number and multiply or divide it by zero and it would disappear, and they thought that was magic and that it represented some form of demonic culture or demonic source. And so it took, as most transitions of thought through history have taken, like thinking the world was flat and thinking we were the center of the world, it took some time to come to terms with how the world actually is and where the world actually is, as we are taking time to come to terms with who we actually are and where we actually are and what the essence of our existence actually is. It took a long time, and most of those times were fraught with people who had ideas that were unpopular because they were unrecognized, being considered worthy of death and execution and elimination simply because their thoughts conflicted with what at that time was considered to be truth and reality. And I would suggest, in what we're witnessing in the world, human history, modern human history, however modern that can be, I suppose that means the last 2,000 years or so, we've had approximately 394 wars, representing 92% of the time recorded in modern history. So only 8% of that time has been at peace. And people have been fighting over thoughts and ideas. And the idea that their thoughts were true and real enough to justify the self-indignation and self-righteousness used to kill people because they don't think like them. And suicide, I would say, today is at an all-time high because people are struggling internally with thoughts about who they think they are, when who they think they are can't be who they are unless thinking is the source of reality. And I would say that's a major conflict in human evolution, if we want to call it evolving, when we're actually degressing rather than progressing. And the digression and degeneration of this continued thought has had an impact not only on our bodies, but also on our social structure, and clearly the social ills that are aptly named to reflect on a broad scale the disease of the thinking we're doing on an individual basis. So my sense in history is, from my own experience with addiction, is that the idea that who I am is what I think is based in fear. And if what I'm thinking all the time, who I am is what I think, I'm maintaining a self-induced state of fear. And anyone who opposes that fear by any contradictory thought seems worthy of fighting and worthy of eliminating and worthy of getting rid of. How we typically do that is keep our distance from people. Don't hang around those people. We don't get near those people that seem to trigger us, not noticing that it's our finger on the trigger that we're trying to avoid. And in this vein, I pulled up a couple of Rumi quotes, who I've read pretty extensively, who was Persian, born in 1207. But he said things like, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself. Starting to see that the essence of growth, the essence of the choices we make, if we're not willing to notice the problems we're creating ourselves, there's a good chance the problems out there that we think we see so clearly are just excuses to avoid what we're actually doing. Not actually the potential that we have, but the limited potential of the thoughts we have that are sick based on who I think I am rather than who I actually am. He says, words are a pretext. It's the inner bond that draws one person to another, not words. So what we're saying here has no basis if there is no basis that we all have right now. And that's worth, I would say, considering, which I would expect anything worthy of hearing is worth considering. He said that, what was the other one that I read here? You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the entire ocean in a drop. And he's starting to reveal that our nature is absolute. We tend to think of it as theoretical and philosophical and some distant thing that's occurring somewhere else, but it doesn't apply to the problems we have on a daily basis. When in fact, if the problems we have on a daily basis are coming from thinking that we're alone and thinking that thinking is my only source, there's a good chance the problems I'm struggling with are coming from that thinking because it's not true, rather than noticing that I am not simply, that I'm breaching the alignment I naturally have with reality and truth by making believe I'm creating my own reality and truth and then fighting other people for it. And I would say that's a lot of what's happening in your country today. Over some single right, if rights are right, they would be true and real because they would be right for everyone, everywhere, and everything too. They would just be right, and they would be a right because they're right. And it's something we share, not something some have and others don't. So to think a government's job is to suppress and oppress its own people is to suggest that their thinking is so afraid, it's actually what they call power is a sign of weakness. And it's expressed in the control they try to exhibit by trying to stop people from simply thinking thoughts that don't align with theirs. And this is basically a roadmap for human history in terms of the destruction and the destructive nature of our own species against itself. And I don't think it's happening today any differently than it's always happened, but it's happening in ways that may be more glaring because we have access to the information about what is happening. And people in those countries also have access to information they used to not have when they would buy the party line because it was all the information they had and think that doing what they were told was the best thing they could do, not only for their own safety, but because there was some rightness in it. And I suspect people have seen, as a result of the internet, as a result of cell communications, all the forms of communication that have expanded in the last 20 or 30 years, started to see that the world is a much different place than they've been told it was by anybody trying to restrict their thinking simply to have them comply with what they want to have done in the way they think is right, rather than rightness in a way that's right for everyone. So that may be a lot of wind, but perhaps it'll move your boat.
They always win. Welcome. So I'm gonna start with a quote from, because you talk about Rumi. He has a quote. It said, "Turn into water, saw myself as a mirage. Turn into an ocean, saw myself as a bubble. Became aware, saw my ignorances. Woke up, saw myself sleeping." Yeah, that it for sure is that like a matter of this thinking that I'm right and I'm gonna implement it to feed probably desires. Again, I guess like you told last time we talked about it, like thinking is kind of our like a manual for like operate this body. And
I would say the feelings are more the manual. The thinking is the freedom to choose what we can do. So if we're
feeling
bad,
is manual.
Well, I would say it's a consequence of thought. If I'm thinking bad thoughts, I tend to feel bad. And if I feel bad and think I need to get away from the bad by overcoming it and doing something to feel better and not notice the cause that's creating the bad, I'm in an addictive cycle because I'm using the symptom as the cause and thinking if I solve the symptom, I've solved the problem, rather than looking at the cause of the thought being bad and wrong, meaning it has no basis. Which if I was trying to do something functionally, that information would be very important because I could cut to the chase a lot quicker than having to go through a failured cycle over and over and over and over again to finally realize something I'm doing is wrong. And my sense is we know very quickly when we're wrong. We have just become desensitized and numb to it, asleep per se, in a trance, pretending it's not happening and thinking the goal in life is learning how to pretend better that what's happening isn't happening, and wonder why what's happening seems to be so out of control and such a mess. If I'm not paying attention to where I'm driving in the car and close my eyes in a perfectly running car and don't look where I'm going to probably run into something. So that awakening you're talking about is actually starting to see things as they are and realize we've never been asleep. We've just been pretending we were asleep to justify the thinking as being real and true, rather than reality and truth already being real and true. And it doesn't need my thinking at all. And now I'm free to actually express it rather than try to conclude it. But I think, your quote, another Rumi quote is, "This place is a dream. Only a sleeper considers it real. Then death comes like dawn," meaning the light comes up, "and you wake up laughing at what you thought was your grief."
Yeah, I cannot talk about that until I really die. Come back.
Well, my sense is that we are not afraid.
There's so many.
My sense is we're not afraid to die. We're really afraid to let go of the thoughts that are filled with fear because they're born in fear. Those self-centered ideas we have about ourself, that thinking we do about our thinking. When I'm thinking about my thinking is thinking of itself, and it is creating a self born of thought, not reality and truth. My thoughts may be real in the context that they happen, but what I think about is a choice. And if what I'm thinking about is who I am, I can't be thinking about who I am and still be the thinker of those thoughts simultaneously. So it sort of disavows the potential for my thoughts being the thinker of who I am. And if that's who I think I am, I know to be afraid. So self-centered fear is created in that cycle. And the reason I'm afraid is because I know what I'm doing is at risk. And it's not only at risk, it doesn't even exist except to the thinking I'm doing about it, just like a lie. A lie has no basis since it only claims to be the opposite of what it is. And it only seems to be true as long as I maintain it as being true, as long as I project it's being true, as long as I think others should believe that it's being true. But it isn't, in fact, ever true. And lies don't exist anywhere other than in thought, human thought. Things that can think of themselves is where lies are capable of being produced. So the fear of death is really the fear of letting go of that thing I called my life and realizing that I have been an imposter throughout all the time I've spent, and then wondered why I didn't feel like enough, felt less than, felt low self-esteem, low self-worth, and wonder why I struggle with reality when I never struggled with reality. I only struggle with the thoughts I have of reality. And only those would be untrue. If I was thinking accurately, I wouldn't have to be thinking about it. I'd just be expressing it.
Okay. So to go back to Iran or like any countries that have like these dictatorship system that they limited every single human right as something that like
Yes,
you can have it, and they don't. I mean, is it? So I think a lot of it is for. I think the origin of this situation is there. It's
repeat that. I'm sorry, I didn't
I think
hear
it's
that.
like is a desire that like cause. I don't know. I'm still like I still don't yes, I think don't give that much credit. I mean, I give credit to thoughts, but it is a matter of like I think desire is the initiation of like you using your thoughts in a way that help you to get there.
Yes. Okay. So if we're there and we don't think we're there,
We are there.
desires,
Wait. Let's if we are there
if we are present right now,
present right
if
now.
we are in the only place we have ever been and the only place we can ever be, and
Based on okay.
and everything else that is also here now. We may not see it, but it's simultaneously connected to us in an interconnected, interrelated world or universe. Everything is interacting everywhere anything's interacting.
Uh-huh.
And if it's all here now in the ever-present moment, and the moment is always new, we talked about this a little bit last time. You were talking about change and where does change go and where does it move? It always moves forward because it's always new. So it's always moving in a direction of present, current, and the current flow of the current moment is the absolute present nature of existence. It's where everything that has ever happened has ever happened. And nothing has ever happened in our thinking about things that have happened, except to the thoughts that we're having about things that aren't actually happening, except in thought. So that doesn't make them happening. It makes our thinking imagine them to be happening. So we are imagining, and our thinking then is basically imagination. My sense is, because I gave a little bit of consideration to your comments last time about desire, I only desire in ways that condemn me, like Buddha talked about. Life is suffering when we have attachments, and the attachments were to desires. That's only the case when I think what I want is something I need to fulfill
Attachment
myself.
coming from desires.
Well, that's what attachment was in Buddhism.
Yeah.
And what Buddha talked about.
So
he said suffering is natural in life, but he wasn't saying it was a consequence of life. He was saying it's a consequence of the possibility of attaching to things, which was desire. And the idea that I need something, that I desire something, is the idea that I don't have everything.
I don't think it's about idea. I think
know
a
you
lot
don't.
of desires is
I
not
know you
about
don't.
thinking and ideas. And
I
then
know.
desire is just your like in your biology. Like
Well,
you're
some of it
thirsty, you
is.
need water. You don't think about like going like
Yes.
go like when you're thirsty, you just walk toward water. Like if you're hungry. So
Yes.
these kind of thing is that I
So
mean
you're
thinking involved.
conceding, Moeen, you're conceding a greater sense of knowing that we have that isn't thinking. You're helping me make the broader point, or helping us make that broader point. We
Mhm.
do have a knowing nature in our body that isn't that. Think of all the things that are going on in our body right now that we're not thinking about that are working perfectly. Or if they're not working perfectly, it's largely because of anxiety and stress that undermines their ability to function perfectly, or something we've done historically that isn't good for us, that we have the right to do, but it was wrong to do it, that's eventually collected and accumulated in a way that's causing a problem for our bodies. So the knowing, yes, is there. And desire
So
in
and it
something we don't think about doesn't cause depression because we just act on it. We
yeah,
know
so
what
now
to
we
do.
are having two categories.
Well, it's
Now
the
we are
same
like one
thing.
category that like their desires,
Yes.
and we don't think about it.
Yes.
And there are one
But I would
category,
say those are needs. Those are literally needs. They are survival instincts.
yes.
And
So
survival
when we
instincts tend to preserve our body, whereas addictive, seemingly survival instincts kill our body. And it
uh-huh.
reverses everything because it's an attempt to turn a lie into truth. And that would be a backward approach. It's a backward approach to thinking is our source when spirituality or this infinite source is theoretical. We've reversed it rather than start to notice that we did that same thing with the horizon when we looked at it and thought it was the edge of doom, when in fact it was the only doomed thought we were having that we were up against the edge of, that we knew was doomed. So we presumed immediately that the horizon spelled doom. When in fact, when we approached it, you realize you can never get to the horizon, but everything that was hidden by the horizon, all of a sudden, as you approach it, becomes evident that it was always there. So what we think isn't there now is still there, regardless of what we think. And it's not there, but it's here now. There actually includes the word here.
Mm-hmm.
So where they are, we are, and where it is, we are too. So where it is really not a spatially bound thing because it's not a time bound thing. If the moment is always new, there is nothing old in it. So there is no continuum for time to exist because there is no, it's always beginning and it never ends. And that would be an infinite present state of being and awareness. And if it exists, that's our primary nature. And to think it isn't our primary nature is to come up with all kinds of conclusions and create gods that act very much like men. And if you think of the way we've identified God, they're generally men, and they generally have traits of really pissed off males, vengeful, spiteful, hateful, fear. All those conditions seem to be imbued in gods, and those are gods made in the image and likeness of humans struggling with ego concept, trying to blame God for the thing we're actually doing, for the wrong we are doing. We blame God so that we use God to justify killing other people in the name of what's right. And it hasn't been right enough yet to resolve the problem. So I would say it's not right at all. It's just a misconception and a mistake and more of the same insanity roaming the planet, making believe someday it'll be true if it gets talked about more and believed in more and relied on more.
Okay.
So in what Rumi said, if we're looking rather than what they're doing is wrong, starting to see that that same wrong is at the heart of what we're doing here now, when I think what I'm thinking is true and real. And immediately, to the point earlier about thinking being the manual, I can think whatever I want, but the consequence of that thinking is immediate. Sort of like my sense is that choices are prayers. And my prayers are immediately answered by the consequential feelings I have about what I'm doing now, not what I've done, not what could happen, what might have happened, what should happen, what was going to happen, what didn't happen, but what's happening now, always. The consequence of the immediacy of my thought tells me whether that thought has any basis or not by how I feel. And I have that sensation in my body. And if I deny those sensations and try to be numb to them because they're uncomfortable, I'm denying the discomfort of the thinking, and I'm committing myself to use that thinking and employ that thinking in a direction that will never be useful and helpful or beneficial for anyone. So I become the same destruction, the same destructive forces we're witnessing in these broader social implications and political implications. Simply by continuing to maintain the thinking that is allowing those things to occur and seem like they're real and right to enough people to continue to operate in the same sort of critical mass that occurs in any culture where you have people divided over what should be or shouldn't be happening, including our own. Mm-hmm. We're sort of like suffering from bipolar disease as a society in America right now. And the closeness of the boats, where it seems odd, almost reveals the absolute neutrality of being dead center of both extremes. So we're almost collectively exhibiting an awareness of a neutrality that doesn't allow things to happen because nobody can agree on anything. But that centrality is almost consistent in all the voting going on, which I don't think is a coincidence. I think it's the same thing that happens when we take positions that are extreme and make believe they're the only thing, and we actually confirm the opposite extreme and then blame the opposite extreme for the problems that happen rather than see that we're actually creating them in our own disposition.
Mm-hmm. So what we're gonna do about it?
I remember you asking that question last time. So, well, the question is, how willing are we to maintain the thoughts that are causing the confidence we have in things that aren't true? And how willing are we to begin to consider that everything is already in perfect order, that the knowing nature of the universe, nature itself, is not arguing with itself. It isn't debating with itself. Whatever an absolute nature is an absolute nature. It's not something that's contestable, but we can think it is. It isn't something divisible, but we can think it is. It isn't something distinguishable, but we can think it is. It isn't something inequitable, but we can think it is. It isn't something that discriminates, but we can think it is.
What are we talking about? Like
pure knowledge, omniscience, omnipotence. The same knowing you were referring to when you suggested there were things we don't have choice over and we just know to do. Our body gives us examples, almost metaphoric examples of our greater sense of existence, because our body seems, the thing that's most complicated about our existence is the thing we pay the least attention to and end up getting petty over somebody who doesn't use their blinker when they change lanes and think that our whole day is ruined because we don't get what we think we want. Overlooking the enormous amount of complexity that even leads to the moments where we can make those claims is beyond our comprehension in terms of understanding. And yet we dismiss as being nothing in the face of making so much of nothing.
So you think we should work on forgiveness?
Well, I think that's a great word. And here's what's interesting about forgiveness. Think of forgiving means I'm interested in doing something for somebody else. I'm forgiving, right? Rather than for taking. And then what's the opposite of that? Forgetting. Mm-hmm. In addiction, I go into a hypnotic trance and make believe what's happening isn't happening because I don't want to face the wrong I'm doing. So I think what I need to do is feel better about it. And I end up creating more and more wrong because I'm not treating the disease of the thinking.
But sometimes it helps you to get out of it.
Well, it gives you some relief. And if it gives you relief, it's an indication it's certainly a direction worth considering and starting to notice. So my sense is everything's always as it is. Everything is always as it is, not as I think it is. And so the only thing I have, literally possess, to forgive is the thinking I'm doing about things that's inaccurate about the things I'm thinking about that I think is right. That's what I'm holding against things. And I'm blaming them. I'm thinking that somebody did something to me 20 years ago that I haven't forgiven. And yet I have been holding that thought for 20 years about them, abusing myself with it and not noticing that I have been the cause of the trauma that I've been carrying for as many years as I've been thinking about it as them doing it and not noticing what I've been doing with the thought in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
So it begins to become an undoing of what's being done rather than a repetition of redoing things
I'm
that
gonna
aren't
mute
working.
myself, but I'm listening.
Yeah. So if there's an absolute source and an infinite source and an unlimited source and an all-knowing source and an all-powerful source in the sense of being all-knowing, that it's actually the nature and order of nature, the laws of nature would be that order. If that exists, that is not theoretical. It isn't a philosophy. It isn't a religion. It isn't theology. It isn't sociology. It isn't biology. It isn't physiology. All of those things are byproducts of the human capacity to consider all of those dynamics within the totality of everything that seems to matter. And in the universe, matter is the only thing that blocks light. So in our experience, the only thing that darkens us, the only thing that we doubt is the matter we're making out of the things we're thinking. When they really matter, all of a sudden I have a greater investment in seeing those things happen the way I think they should. And that's a choice. So those are choices.
Matter is almost 90 something empty space.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting? You know what the remnant of the matter in that it's actually 99.99999% space and 0.00001% matter. You know what the matter is in that 0.00001?
Uh-huh.
99.99999% space. So in Rumi's quote, it's an illusion. It's a dream. And now we can talk about that, but it doesn't seem when we walk through our day that it's much of a dream. When we stub our toe or run headlong into something or don't have the money to pay for rent and wonder why things seem to be going so wrong and that our reality or our seeming reality seems to be so effective.
So from the moment that you feel you don't have money and you have to pay rent, and if you don't pay rent by end of the month, you will be homeless. And when you will be homeless, you're gonna lose friends and blah 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 blah, and all this pain gonna come to you.
Well, you're gonna make all kinds of new friends.
Yes, it's very sure. For sure. So so the thought, now is one of those desires. This is now is threat your survival, because you cannot sleep well. Eventually, you're gonna get sick and you die.
Yes.
So you are getting homeless and your life is under threat. You're probably gonna now your thinking gonna comes to change the situation, because if you don't do anything and accept everything that whatever it is, you're gonna be homeless and you're gonna get more pain.
Yes.
So now your thoughts get involved, your options now take you to action, unless you're like too numb that they said whatever happened, I don't care, I just go with I accept the whole thing and I will become homeless and explore new world. But I think rule of thumb that most of us, we don't want to get to that point.
Yes.
And so these thoughts involve now. So at this point, I these thoughts helps us, like the thoughts to changing the situation for something that our survival is under threat. I don't see a point to just accept this. It is what it is, and don't do anything. I mean, like these thoughts.
I didn't say do nothing. I didn't say do nothing. I simply said it is what it is. And if we base that, our thinking on beginning to concede that, now doing everything possible becomes much more likely than thinking based on doubtful premises that have us begin to imagine only doing things that are impossible as the only possibility.
Would you give me two scenarios in that, like homeless person?
Well,
Like, so do you have, based on you're saying, like there's two options, right?
well, there's thousands of options, but I'm boiling it down for the sake of a conversation and looking at it. If my thinking, and I lived in a van for a year, I had 5 homes by the time I was 25, or 6 homes, and had none at 26. I'd lost everything. I was 7 years behind in taxes at one point. I came to Venice originally 50 grand in debt or so with not having paid taxes. I was in that state. But the bankruptcy of my own thinking became clear to me. So what's bankrupt thinking? But thinking about spending when you don't have the money. And what's that? An idea that has no basis being utilized as though it's right and real.
So, okay, like spending that money on something that you don't
like
have.
Drugs.
Yeah. Okay.
Like thinking I need a BMW when I only had enough money in the whole world for a BMW, and thinking somehow that car was going to make a big difference to me at 22 or 23, which I always spent everything I made because I was so dependent on expressing it and having it revealed to everyone else, because I was so concerned that my own thinking might be uncovered as being so bankrupt. I needed them to be convinced I was really together.
Okay. And you think that the way that you were, it was a byproduct of like the culture that push you to that, or like it's something that is like in your like desire that you need? Because like when you meet our like initial desire, like food, water, housing, and these kind of things, so we as a human being, you pursue other things, right? Like if we just sit and eat and all these things, so they will be bored. We say, okay, now these are me, let's pursue other desires. And it may be like, I don't know.
Let's use food, because I would say it's probably one of the most addictive things people do. We have a need to eat.
Yeah, but you weren't in that point. In that point, you weren't, your survival was all meat, all meat. And what were you pursuing to your desire, like attention? I don't know what were like a power or community, just feeling better. I don't know.
Probably all those things.
All those things. And so
when I am sick in my thinking, my instinct for survival is reversed. So the things I do end up giving me the appearance and the thought I may be better, but what I'm really doing is getting better at being worse. Because I'm pursuing ideas that haven't worked and thinking if I just pursue them harder and longer, they'll start working. And it's the same thing as thinking that if I feel better because I do cocaine or have a drink or sugar or eat fried foods, I'll be better off, when in fact they're all creating a deficit in my body that at some point is going to extract some cost that doesn't seem to be occurring while I'm doing it. Because I can seemingly postpone the cost, I keep spending and spending and spending and wondering all of a sudden why I can't seem to solve the problem, because the thinking I'm doing about it has no basis. It's not useful. It's sick. It's an idea about ego. It's an idea about grandiosity. It's an idea about pride. It's an idea about expanding the awareness. It's expanding my appearance or increasing my appearance rather than noticing the lack of substance that causes that impulse. So when you're talking about desire, if my desire is to eat and what I end up eating is fried food all the time, I'm not going to nourish my body. I'm going to satisfy my taste and I'm going to satisfy my stomach perhaps. But my body, when I'm done eating that fried food, at some point is going to say, thanks for the food, but now I need nourishment. Give me more. And I suspect that obesity today is so popular because it's really a form of starvation, where it's not about nourishment. It's about eating poor quality food the body doesn't know what to do with, so it stores it and says, okay, thank you, I need more. I need nourishment. I need vitamins. I need minerals. I need fiber. I need all of the functional things that help my cellular structure actually grow and develop. And what I do is feed it stuff that's cheap and tastes good and wonder why I need more and more and more. It creates a craving because I'm trying to fill a void in the thinking I'm doing, and rather address the thinking, I'm trying to fill the body with this. I'm trying to fill the body with cocaine, drugs, alcohol, whatever I want to use to distract myself, to keep my focus off of the fact that it's my thinking that has no basis that's really causing the initial problem. And I would say our homeless problem is largely drugs, alcohol, and mental illness. And drug and alcohol addiction is a mental illness.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And what do? Promise people condos. What does that do? Give them the impression that the worse they get on the street, the quicker they get a condo. We're giving them a bonus for getting worse rather than helping them realize and resuscitate the absolute nature of their own dignity and their own capacity as a human being. We're actually helping them get worse, which is a social problem of the same addictive thinking occurring at the level of the policymakers. The homeless aren't coming up with the policies. The policies are being made by people that think they're helping when they're actually hurting, because they're giving people more latitude to get worse rather than recognize the problem is in the thinking they're doing. So if you and I are unhealthy in the thinking we're doing about all the things we can see out there that are wrong, we are contributing to that wrong by continuing to maintain the same thinking, rather than start to open up a conversation that addresses it in a way that is accurate enough to be reliable enough, to be useful enough, to be recognized and actually implemented and employed, rather than continue to feed the fear and the conversation as though it's them and not us, you and I right now.
Mm.
So we're never anywhere other than where we are. We're always in the present. And how we think about our present state is what we struggle with, not the present state, because there is no struggle in a present state that's absolute, because it doesn't change. It doesn't have any, it doesn't think. It isn't part of the realm that we seem to be living in, which is about relativity and opposites and duality. When opposites are seen as the same thing, the problem with duality disappears for humans. And yet duality has been at the central core of almost every major movement, religious movement, to try and overcome, rather than recognize it's simply a thought that one side could be right while the other side's wrong, when in fact both of them are the same thing. The common ground in between the extremes is shared by all things. So it doesn't distinguish us, it doesn't separate us, it doesn't disconnect us. Those things we think that we're disconnected by and lonely over are simply thoughts that have no basis. They have no denominator. Actually, zero comes in here, where you could have a huge numerator with zero under it, and it does not add up to anything. Doesn't matter how much more you do on the top, there's nothing below it on the bottom. There's no foundation.
Maybe we don't need a foundation.
In essence, you're right. That would be absolutely correct. But within thinking, the fundamental basis of usefulness is being on a foundation that doesn't change, which doesn't speak in the same way that a foundation for a building would, but it becomes the essence of our present nature beginning to express itself in the certainty of something that's absolutely known, rather than the doubt of what is thought to be known and the fear. Casting shadows of doubt have shadows because they're attempting to block the light. And that's why we refer to shadows of doubt as having shadows, because we're actually seeing them from the dark side. We're trying to project these images as being real and true, when in fact they just give us an impression that's exactly correct for the action we're taking, but it isn't any more than an illusion that we're creating. And to make believe it's true is then to feel that we're condemned to death and hell and darkness, and we're dark characters, because we actually believe what we're doing is truth and reality rather than simply a thought. The content of the thought is basically just imagined.
Yeah, maybe we put thinking as a foundation.
Yes. Very good. I knew that silence, the actual knowledge is in the silence and the peace. And I knew that it would lead to something. And that's exactly correct. We think thinking is our source. And if thinking is our source, then all we think we are is what we think. And why wouldn't we, if we actually had an infinite source, feel less than and low self-esteem and low self-worth and self-loathing to imagine all we are is what we think when all other aspects of what is possible actually are included in our capacity to think. We've even eliminated the little things we can think about to make believe all we are is what we think. It's a natural consequence. So the consequence, by the way, getting back to the roadmap or the owner's manual, the consequences we experience are extensions of the feelings we have. So when I feel bad, the consequences are going to be bad. They're going to manifest the badness. So we have been manifesting the mess all along, claiming we're not creators, when in fact we've been given and endowed with the potential to create whatever we want. We've just been making a mess and been embarrassed about it. And so think of what self-consciousness means. You would think a self with consciousness would be a pretty elaborate, elevated state of being, right? But you know what the definition of self-consciousness is? An exaggerated regard for appearance. Why is that? Because we're making believe that how we look is how we are. How we think we are is how we are. How our image is how we are. We're projecting an image as being who we are when in fact we're embarrassed about what we're doing. So self-consciousness would be an elevated state if we were actually imbuing that consciousness into that self. But in fact, there is no consciousness in that self that we're imagining because it isn't real or true. It's just imagined. There's nothing wrong with imagination. When we think it's true and real, we have put the stake in it and pretend that it's got everything has to be end up being the way we thought it would or should, and end up being in this sense of contempt that we've created by being condemned to making believe we have to keep the thoughts up to maintain the ideas we have, because self-centered thinking leads to self-serving thoughts, serving the thought, or the thought serving the self, constantly thinking. Like we aren't who we are. Descartes said, I am, therefore I think. And he was talking about us as humans, but in essence, we are, therefore we think. The reverse of that is the actual state of our being.
So in the way that he said it is like everything, if you cannot think, you don't exist.
Exactly.
But I don't know.
Well, what he was getting at, if I have this correct, and I don't claim to be a philosopher, I just talk about things.
Why not?
Well, because it would limit the view. I would rather deal in actuality than philosophical concepts and ideas.
Philosophy is everything is in it.
So he was also pointing out that he was looking at our human experience and saying, we can absolutely predict how things go. And the scientific method was created out of that process, which was a process of elimination, a process of beginning to test things. And the theory was if things continued to happen consistently, then you were thinking about them accurately. And that's what science has essentially been on the job of. But here's the one glaring oversight, in my estimation, what you just said. Descartes, I believe, was conceiving of this within the human experience, but also noticing that if we were predicting what could be done by the thinking we were doing, we were beginning to realize the laws of nature that exist beyond our thinking. And it was beginning to be a concession to reality and truth rather than the manufacture of reality and truth. But similar to Origin of the Species, written by Darwin in that book referred to survival of the fittest 13 times in relation to things that certain species use to survive. But he used the word cooperation 70-something times in that book to describe how species survive. So what's the more common memory that we have and the more common use of what he had said? Survival of the fittest. Why? Because it justifies our self-centered ideas to fight and dominate and kill and minimize and discriminate and create inequity to prove who's the best and the biggest and the rightest. When in cooperation includes everyone. It's like Stephen Hawking said that when you are at the center, when you're dealing in an infinite universe, everybody's at the center. And self-centered thinking generally thinks for the self thinking it that self is the only self against all other selves and things rather than a part of them all. Very different transition in terms of cooperation and unity.
I think, or I with a feeling that everything we can think of,
Yeah.
anything,
What's that?
anything that we can think of, or
Yeah.
like ideas, or
Yeah.
like knowledge, or anything. So if we detach emotion from it, right, doesn't have any meaning for you. If by doing any action, you won't feel better or worse, that action doesn't mean anything to you, or that action, even like you use the force to do that action, what is the motivation of doing that action?
This isn't trying to disqualify our human experience from consequence. It's starting to allow us to see the consequence as a perfect guide for what we're doing as being right or wrong, useful or useless, helpful or hurtful.
Yeah, I think a lot of good doing and our action is about reproduction. Every single of us.
Yes.
Like a lot of the package that we are, you see all these millionaire, all the men, usually they have issue with feminine, with women, like they usually like so there is a lot of like a reproduction, and for the woman as well, a lot of action we do, we want to like be famous, popular, or like knowledge, or any aspect is a lot of, and we want to have a more copy of ourselves.
We want to have a copy of ourselves?
Yeah, because our ideology,
we've already made one in our brain.
Yeah. No, but I'm saying like all the action of like human being, like
artificial intelligence started with the ego.
These are like all feeding of like these are at the end, it's like a human biology.
Yes.
Is all about reproduction, and it can be reproduction because even the knowledge, you want to get to that knowledge and pass that knowledge to your next gene to becomes more successful, or in the most naturalistic way, you mate with the whole opposite sex and like maximize your production because you think that you are better than others.
Yeah.
And that would help for the like that race move on and on and on. And I think this is for like every living thing is the same scenario. Like, to base it, like if you give like a sequence standard to ant, to bees, they're gonna be dominant themselves. To trees, they're gonna do the same thing. They're gonna human, we are doing the same thing. And about like this thinking and stuff, I think thinking anything I can think can be good or bad. Like, is it just I think what is more important is about intention, like the projection of like something, and you're bleeding, your head is bleeding a little bit, by the way. The other side.
Yeah, I bumped something.
Yeah. But so it can be good or bad. I think what is more important now in the time that we are living in, what is our intention as like a human being. So we have seen history we got lesson, and now we have a very strong tool, which is science. We can like exchange information very high. We can like kind of, so we can set up as a goal or intention for the whole human being, instead of like every part of the world have their own intention, and they divine, and they to bring freedom in one country, you need to shed so many blood in another country. So never like
That isn't
luxury.
quite freedom. That's the, think
I
about
mean,
the fact.
relative, right?
I
Like
understand.
people like in United States, they have like a more freedom of like right, human right, and these kind of thing in United States. And those people in Iran, they or Middle East, they have like a barbarian thinking about like these kind of thing, less freedom. But to pay for like these luxury that people have freedom here, and because when the situation is good, like you can talk about this stuff easier, like if the like a luxury, and like you have to like the money that or the coming from other countries give the luxury to be free here and with these level of living. So I think it's a time to just globally, I don't know, like we just come up with a constitution law for the whole world. Like
what if we just start noticing that one of the problems is yours and my inability to begin to conceive of things accurately enough to recognize that all those people everywhere already know what they know in the same way you and I know what we know, and that Constitution has already been written within the laws of nature and our existence, and it's ever present for everybody everywhere, and start to notice that all we've done collectively as societies is fail in the exact same way we do individually, making believe that my thought is true and real at the expense of actually creating. When I create condemnation in my own thinking, it's because I'm making believe something that isn't true is true. That condemnation, you think of how in our country, this United States that talks about freedom, we say that freedom comes at a cost. Now, if you went into a store and they said, buy two, get one free, but it'll cost more than the first two, you'd say, what? But here we say freedom comes at a cost, because we have gotten used to fighting for freedom rather than simply conceding the natural freedom that we all have and share. And our exclusiveness in thinking that we are a separate country from all other species gives us the same impression that I get when I start thinking who I am is what I think, and I start thinking the distinguishing feature of who I am is all I think, and I need now to fight for everyone else to think like I do, or not hang around those people or do something to them that gives me the sense that I've created justice and freedom, when in fact I've contemptfully created more of the same condemnation I'm claiming to want to avoid. So in your point about health, health is survival. Those dominant trees that grow are the ones that are surviving better than the other ones. And the dominant breeds created amongst humans are the ones that have the better gene pools. And what's interesting is, like in the royal families in England that interbred for a long time because they felt royalty was in the blood, so they interbred between cousins and cousins and cousins and relatives, and all of a sudden created a form of mental retardation within the family structure that they hid away in institutions. So what's interesting is that the broader the mix of genes, the healthier the potential for the species. And when I start thinking all that I am is what I think, and I start thinking like inbreeding in my own thinking that all that's happening is my thinking, I start inbreeding my own thoughts and wonder why the actions I start taking become defective and degenerative and impose a depressing, stressful, anxious condition on my body that undermines all of my ability to allow the natural biology to do what it's designed to do, because now it's contending with actually a imposed by the self I think I am condition that is stressing it and undermining its ability to even function. And I'm claiming disease is normal while healing is something miraculous. because I've reversed my whole tendency in thinking. So I would suggest, worth considering, that our intention is that things be exactly how they are right now. Because the only way they can
But
be.
it doesn't make you any action though. If you do
Yes,
that way of thinking.
It actually stops the fight. The action now becomes based on peace because we're starting to let things be as it is rather than think it should be something it can't be.
I mean, like there is other side is killer.
Yes.
Like, you know, when you like, you can like do Gandhi movement, like it just, you know, like no matter how much
think
you
of what
hurt
he
me,
did.
I'm not gonna do right. But what I'm saying, like at the end, he didn't solve the problem. Kinda, they killed him and they shoot him, and so it's I don't know, like it's that way of seeing, like it's just everything, it is what it is, and just be in the moment, and just because in every moment accept that it is what it is and don't do any action toward it. It's gonna eat you.
You're thinking this means not do anything. And I'm suggesting it's the opportunity to do everything possible rather than launch on crusades that are impossible and continue to inflict the same fight in a new seeming way that does the same old thing.
But so you don't accept, you're projecting future with something that you desire for.
No, I'm just suggesting
I mean, like if you do your action change, do something action for like for the future, because you're diagnosed that it's something that is not doing it right, and I accept that it's not doing it right, and at this point I'm gonna perceive like a branch of action to change that thing in the future.
Well, I wouldn't think
that would involve thoughts.
I don't think there is any future. I think the future is always present when it occurs, and the past was present when it occurred. So we now are in the only place we can be, in the only place that any thought ever occurs, and the only place that anything ever happens. And if we're here thinking of things in impossible ways, we are going to create impossible consequences in that seeming future that we're heading toward. And that's essentially the history of modern society and humans.
Yeah, but it's happening. Like this is like a operation system. This is like in the living in this war that we are in it. This is I mean, this is the like basically these are like those chain and like those way that make it moving, right? So it's a man. I'm thinking, and all these things are part of that machine. But
how much better are we, Moein, thinking about it in ways that it isn't, in ways that it should be, than the peace that comes with starting to at least concede that it is what it is right now, regardless of what I think. And now I can employ my thinking on a basis that has solid ground because I'm actually addressing what's happening as what's happening rather than something that should not be happening while it's all that's happening, and use that doubt as my guide and fear as my guide rather than start to actually master peace and say, oh, my natural state is always at peace. It's only what I've been thinking that causes the conflicts. And if I'm relying on the thinking that's conflicted, I'm going to act in conflicted and doubtful ways over and over and over again.
But this doesn't matter if somebody bombed your house. Yes, you can think like that, like everything is good and everything is in peace and all this thing, and all of a sudden, boom, boom, you lose 4 members of your family, and you're just alone in this world, and you're like 10 years old. Like,
so now that doesn't happen.
That's not practical.
It doesn't need to happen to me for me to be aware that that is happening to others, and to recognize that that is very disturbing, that the conclusion somebody could make one day was to bomb a house, and not think I'm participating in that by making believe because it hasn't happened to me, it hasn't happened. And so the accuracy of my thinking is starting to see that everything that's happening, I am a part of and I am responsible for.
I'm listening.
It is not some vain recollection of fantasy. It's the actuality of what's happening. And I would suggest if we're here to do anything, It's to deal with the things that are happening rather than the ones we think should be happening and end up in a fight that promotes and perpetuates the things that are wrong, because I think somehow I am going to, as a lone crusader, straighten everyone out by thinking something that everybody else isn't thinking until they start thinking like I do, which would require me to talk to 8 billion people, which would be unlikely, rather than begin to see that if we have a common nature that is common, that we have a nature that we absolutely share in the exact same way right now, everyone, everywhere. And if I'm beginning to think in those terms, I begin to be conscientious about things that are happening that are disturbing and be disturbed by those things rather than brush them off as things not happening and thinking that my own potential for denial and delusion is my goal in life. And I can begin to start talking about them more accurately because I know those people there know exactly what I'm talking about, like you know exactly what I'm talking about if we share anything. And all we're struggling with what we think about what we know rather than what we actually know. If there's an absolute basis, we know what that is. And this has been discounted through history. And I would say science has been hamstrung in their own search, thinking we don't know and thinking there are mysteries in the universe, when the mystery is, why have we perpetuated the idea that we're part of the whole thing and don't know better through the entire nature of science, rather than saying we already know everything, we're just not expressing it very well, and start to relate to nature on a friendly, peaceful basis that would be more intuitive and inclined toward awareness than thinking of it as something that's hiding, when everything that's doing everything it's doing is doing everything it's doing right now, and anything there is to discover in it would certainly be discovered by conceding that right now it's all happening, as it's designed to happen, or as its order is happening. It's doing it right now. It isn't a secret. That's actually part of why we're even able to talk about it. We're part of that. We are not apart from it.
I just don't get it. Like, for myself, I don't see like a benefit of the thinking about that much. Yeah, I mean, like for me, it's maybe I can like, because I'm practical, you know.
You meditate.
Any thoughts, any like
you
way
meditate.
of thinking. Yes.
You meditate. Why do you meditate?
To shut down my thoughts and feels good.
Okay. And what happens when you do that? You just said.
I shut down my thoughts and feel good. Better.
You feel better. Yeah. What happens? Why? That state that you're realizing is always, it doesn't just come when you're meditating. You're just bothering to say, well, because I'm doing this thing, I'm not going to take credit for what I'm feeling. So I'm in charge, because ego wants only to take credit for what it doesn't do, claiming credit for everything it does, rather than say, no, this natural, peaceful state is our constant state of awareness. It can't be there every time we go to it, not there when we don't go to it, if there isn't something always there that we're simply ignoring by the preoccupation of what we're doing in thought. And this isn't to suggest we shouldn't be thinking and we should do nothing. This is the suggestion that if we could begin to realize the nature of our existence is already perfectly intact, and that that's actually our essence. And essence must be essential, so it can't be something good for me and not good for you. It can't be something useful to me and not useful to you and everyone else. And by the way, everything else, and everything we don't even think is a thing at this point. It's being used by it all. Existence naturally is based on that. And if my thinking is launching off on a crusade of thinking my thinking has got to get to the conclusion, I'm forgetting that I am in the immediacy of the conclusion right now. And that is an awakened state of meditation right there. It's just beginning to concede, I'm always there. I'm always whole. I'm always with you. I'm always with all. I'm always with everything that is and all that are. We're intimately connected. There is no division between any of us except how things appear and what we think. And that doesn't mean how they appear is true and real. It just means that's what our body does to function in this spatial dimension that we're operating in. Our eyes are designed to see what they see. They do not see things that are invisible. But our understanding is designed to see things that we can't see. And when my understanding is that all that I have is thinking, I am misunderstanding my capacity by ignoring and denying the massive potential of the knowing knowledge that we all share, and beginning to realize everybody already knows it. I don't need to tell them anything. But to talk about it is to remind people of that awareness if they're willing to consider it. And we all do things to achieve that peace that we get by doing the things. Why are we constantly trying to feel better if we're not doing something worse? Why are we always trying to strive for happiness if we're happy?
Because we are not.
We don't think we are. Yes. That's all happening in thought. It's not happening in a being nature. It's not happening in life.
I don't know. It's just thoughts. I mean, I
know you don't.
I don't think it's like 100% that thing.
I know.
I mean, I think it's like play a big part, but part of it is not thoughts.
Have you ever been put out under anesthesia during surgery?
Yeah, 3-4 times.
Okay. Were you depressed during that time?
During when I was out.
Yeah.
Or after I get out.
when you were out, were you
when
unhappy?
I was out, I think I was off.
Yeah, exactly. So
it
you're
wasn't
thinking,
happy. It
you
wasn't
weren't thinking.
sad.
You weren't thinking, and you weren't experiencing anything. Our senses in our
I
body.
don't remember. I don't know.
Exactly. So we started earlier with forgiveness. The opposite of forgiveness is forgetfulness. What do we do when we go into this intoxication of thought? Gives us the impression nothing else is happening than what we're thinking. And we're actually relying on thinking to prove that there's nothing else going on than what we're thinking, or to prove that there's something else going on, which would also indicate that we have a knowing awareness that's beyond our thinking, and yet discounting the knowing awareness in our thinking at the same time. The forgetfulness is the trance it's a hypnotic trance that we think we're not doing what we're doing while we're doing what we're doing. I drove drunk in a blackout, a woman home years ago, 40 years ago. And I always said I was in a blackout. And then I realized, how was I in a blackout if I drove the car, got onto the freeway, went 20 miles to drop her off, got her to the house she went to? I was clearly aware, but I wasn't thinking I was aware. My memory didn't seem to be working because somehow or another I was in a state that allowed that intoxication to preoccupy my experience. It didn't mean I wasn't aware, like people sleepwalking, like people having dreams. They're illusions, but they can scare us to seeming death and wake us up with a start simply from an experience that's projected. So this isn't so much an argument for something or a case for something or a demand of anything, but to simply begin to recognize that we have an innate awareness that we know, that we're aware of. And when we think we don't, it's only thinking that we're doing that's causing the impressions that we create. And when we manifest those impressions over time, they're depressing because they're literally bearing down on us in ways that are self-imposed by a self created in thought. That's it. And it's all a hallucination. It's all an imagination. It's all simply thinking that what we're imagining is true and real, like a mirage. It is not real. It is not truth. It's simply a product of possibility that truth and reality provide us, that love gives us. Love allows us to hate because it doesn't have restrictions. It doesn't demand we not do it. It just says, you want to do that? The consequences are yours too. And that's the beauty of that guidance system. And that's our owner's manual. That body language speaks to us. And if we're willing to read it, our functional capacity increases dramatically in terms of what we're able to accomplish, because we stop doing foolish, useless things, thinking they'll come true, and start doing things we know we can do and aren't so tired trying to perfect the things that can't be done, because we're starting to have the value immediately come back from the things that can be done, like you're talking about in your own experience of achieving those things that you set out to in those 40-day periods, the writing and all that kind of stuff, the book you wrote last time, or what was your process this time focused on?
The most recent one?
Yeah, the one you're in the last 2 days of.
This is freedom. I don't know, but the last 40 days, it was challenge of like you lose everybody that you love, and you cannot bring them back again. Like, imagine like all your loved one, your family, your best friend, your partner, your pet, everything you love, is dead now, and you cannot change it.
So you're imagining non-existence.
Yeah, you cannot change it. How would you survive? Is there any other motivation to keep yourself alive? So that was a challenge.
So you're trying to.
It was painful.
You're almost trying to strip
most painful thing of my life.
Yeah, you're trying to strip yourself of all existence in the name of seeking a source that I would suggest isn't missing.
Yeah, that's it's just
you can't lose what you can't find. What can't be lost can't be found.
Yeah, but for me, like I see it as a game. I see it as a possibilities and everything, like thinking process or all these things are the tool. And just how can I use all these tools to play the game that ideally every single of us in created that game and just play in it.
Yeah.
Like don't take it anything too much serious, because Gandhi say if you get too deep in any topic, you'll drown yourself. So
well, and Rumi said that we wake up to the grief and start laughing at it when we wake up and realize that it was all just self-imposed, is effectively what he's talking about.
I wish, is that the case?
Well, but
I remember the idea, hopefully.
It may be worth noting that one of the reasons I went off in the direction of figuring out what you were doing this time was because I remember last time that the book that you tried to write didn't come out the way you thought it was, and you felt a little disappointed with yourself and a little lackluster about the experience. And yet the experience gave you a story that was very interesting because it was very thoughtful and very personal and very immediate to your experience.
Yeah, but the reason I didn't feel good about that thingy with book or the story, it wasn't because it wasn't a good story. It was because I was lazy and I didn't spend my time on the challenge. That I didn't feel good about it. And this is how I learned, like this is because when you go through pain stuff, that like you're loading so much information because you try to, like, for last 40 days, because you're so much on emotional pain and you're just functioning, come up with the idea, get out of this pain. But for me, it wasn't I couldn't rely on any external happiness source. I need to come up with the ideology. I need to come up with a projection. I need to come up with or lifestyle that I just focus on, go moment to moment and trust my lifestyle, and everything gonna come to the place when it's time and it's a place. But to just cope.
You're acknowledging the internal friction and conflict.
Yeah,
that
for sure.
seemed to drive you in directions of doing things you thought you didn't want to do, when in fact those must have been the things you wanted to do to be doing them.
Yeah, and always the opposite thing when you're said
that's intention,
happy too. So you're that was the intention. Yeah, that for me is like only have one intention. That's the whole out of whole my life. What I've been spending time. It's kissing. I'm all about it. I'm all about the kiss. It's about the connection. It's about he wants to expand himself. Like he wants to face the truth. Like he wants and that is the only thing I care about.
But what if your essence is truth?
I think everything is truth. Everything is happening is a truth. Like bad or good, it's just something that I label to it. Because they say truth it doesn't go through changes. Truth is constant.
Yes.
What goes through changes is our being. And
is it a being or is it our thinking?
I mean, I think it's a I don't think it's just one thing. I don't. Is it thinking in just one sense? Like, yeah, it's an important thing, but
Well,
I think
have you
is
ever had a feeling that you
it
didn't
like
put into words?
however in the feeling that, yeah, I dance. Um,
You just put it into a word.
no, like dancing. No, when somebody dance, like you look at him, is not expressing his feeling through the words. Is expressing his feeling through his body. Um,
But it's an expression.
Yeah, but I'm saying like thinking is a one way of expressing thing in the realm of being. We have
Yes.
like so many other way we can like
Yes.
exchange information, and like just the way that you look at somebody's eyes can like transform you.
Yes.
Like is not necessary, but I'm saying like given the all this thing happening to the thinking like you say maybe is like a foundation of denominator, like it's that is spectrum, like it just it's now matter what you're going to put at the top,
Yes.
like how much your capacity is
Well, the
to
difference though is if the denominator is zero, it doesn't matter what you put on the top. You're going to create the lazy, tired, dissatisfied, unhappy consequences because it doesn't matter how much effort you do because there's nothing on the bottom to give it credit.
actually that is my way of living.
What's that?
That is my style. I usually
Well,
put denominator zero.
but it's a
because
choice.
like because it's but because I put at the yeah the two, because like for me it's like that nothing, like
Yeah.
it just actually it means like that infinite thingy, like
Yes.
that in terms of like all potential, all possibilities that
Yes.
exist no matter of in my thinking process limitation, that the what exists as the whole.
Yes. Well, if you're hoping for hopeless things, there's no hope. And to
Hope,
hope
yeah,
something
hope. I
that
mean, hope is coming from like a projection, right? Like hoping is like you wishing something that it comes or no, and based on that, your hope shaped. So
if you're
if you accept it is what it is, you wouldn't have any hope. Like,
well, you would have hope that if it is what it is, it certainly is what it is. So you don't need hope because it is what it is. And now you've resolved the whole issue of hope completely. Truth doesn't require hope. But when we have hope in something that's hopeful, it gives us it's part of the guidance system. If we have hope in something that's hopeless, the guidance system is based on a sick thought that has no denominator. It's based on zero underneath of whatever we've done to make believe it's true that isn't
so
true.
so is it hope coming from like a logic?
I think it's a sense of knowing. I think we know better and we haven't learned to act according to what we know because we've been so busy thinking it was thinking that we knew and thinking that was the source and thinking about the thinking is going to solve it. And we haven't allowed that. We haven't been as intuitive as we're capable of because we've been busy, preoccupied with a level of thinking that hasn't been accurate. And so it causes struggle and grief and mourning and a sense of loss because we're missing the opportunity and we know it. And that's what we're really grieving. We don't grieve the loss of our family. We don't grieve all the things we point to because if they have the same absolute sense or being, if their nature is an absolute being nature, they don't ever disappear anyhow. They're already part of existence. They can't not be part of existence. There's no end to something that doesn't end. There's no something that's always beginning has no end. If there's an infinite source, and people have argued with me over saying, well, everything's finite. And I say, well, what limits the finite? How can something be finite and not notice that it's limited by something infinite? And that infinite isn't just what's beyond the thinking we're doing. It's actually within the thinking we're doing because thinking is a product of that infinite source and that infinite knowing. Thinking isn't created, the infinite knowing isn't created by what we think about it. The infinite being is interfered with when we start thinking what we think about it is what we know rather than concede we know what we know and operate from that basis without continuing to question it. And our thinking naturally begins to do things that we would not think our thinking is capable of because you don't notice the stress and strain, because that tends to create a slowness of time and things lagging and being difficult and hard to bear and all those words we use to describe those kind of experiences that we create. The knowing becomes immediate. It becomes invigorating. And that sense you're talking about being tired doesn't happen in that, because the confirmation of the immediacy is everything that's happening. And that's the fuel and the energy of the entire universe working in our favor, as we're allowing it to be favorable to the thinking we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Very different experience. So part of this is not to contest again and argue and fight against anything, but start to notice that if something is what it is, it simply is what it is, period. And it doesn't make my thinking doesn't make it more or less, as Shakespeare said.
Yeah, that is like pretty much meditation.
Yes.
That
I would
like
suggest,
with all those like is the like pretty much this is how the meditation like trying
yes,
to like practically like teach us how to feel it that way. How you look at the world that way.
So here's the problem I found with that. When I sit next to a quiet, babbling brook that eases my body and my experience, I am thinking that meditation is limited to a quiet, babbling brook that eases my experience, and I am benefiting from the ease I'm creating and the experience I'm creating, but I'm not learning to recognize that if we are beings, our natural being state of awareness is ever present. We are always in a state of meditation. We are always awake, and we are simply thinking we're not.
I think it's too much thinking.
Well, I think when you see this,
I
you'll
think
see there's no thinking to it.
Meditation, because when you go to meditation,
Yeah.
you and you get to that point, you understand.
Let me ask you this. When you come out of that state of meditation, do you feel like you're still in that state of meditation?
Or sometimes effect exists.
Yeah, but it's circumstances that tends to collide with that seeming peace, right?
Yeah, but that is part of life. This is like I'm not changing anything. That is like one.
While that peace absolutely is still peaceful and absolutely still your existence and absolutely the basis of your existence and absolutely the basis of existence is still peaceful and still absolute and exactly what it was when you went looking for it, it is still there exactly in the same way when you're thinking it's not, because you're conflicted with what's happening in terms of the circumstances. It's still there. So my sense is... But I don't
feel, I mean, yes, everything is...
I know that because you're feeling your thoughts. You're not feeling your present awareness. You're preoccupied with thinking your thinking is something you need to overcome and stop and avoid and feel better about, when in fact... Not
necessarily. Like maybe after my meditation, I'm in the ocean and swimming with dolphins. So
yeah,
there is
so
nothing
let's
like...
talk about that.
That's a different way of like a feeling and sensation and being, I think.
Again,
like it doesn't have to be always there. I think
when it comes to effort, when you make a choice to do something and accomplish something, it seems to be those points you've discussed as being the points you struggled with and felt lazy and didn't do what you thought you were going to do in relation to the writing you were going to do, because you actually did the writing, but you also saw that you were doing things to avoid the writing.
I didn't do the writing.
The point here is that we tend to mistake how things are going based on how we expected them to go, because we thought the thought we had about them initially was true and real, rather than simply a thought.
That is the whole process of being. I think that this is like, there is nothing wrong with it. Like, this is like, it just worked that way. It is what it is. I mean, like maybe...
As that becomes, as it became apparent to me, I'll speak
because I only count for myself, like I cannot like expand into like other people, like how I can just...
Hang on a minute though. If truth is true, that must be true for everybody, right?
I don't know.
Really? You think it would be false for them and true for you? Could it be possible that it would be false?
I'm like, I'm not in that level to answer that question. At this stage of I'm in, I can like you said, Rumi, right? You said like, if I'm going to change the world, like change others, and it's a wise to change myself. So I'm trying to just be conscious about as an individual, that who am I?
Yes.
And then if I get to that point of that level of good understanding and like have something to share, I will share. But to answer this question, I don't know.
What if though this knowing nature, do you know what intuition is defined as?
Some strong like feeling about something that you have seen is truth in it.
Knowledge beyond reason, meaning there's no thinking in it.
Okay.
So if that's our essence, and essence is essence of existence, would that include everyone or exclude some?
It just depends. Like, what topic are we talking about? Like, are we
like existence? Let's talk about existence. Let's.
I
Make
mean,
that
I'm
the
sure,
topic.
like they said, like butterfly effect. Like even
No,
like
I'm
one
not
fly.
talking. I'm not talking about all the things in it. I'm talking about all things and all that are and all that is. If existence is the basis for all those things, everything. If existence is the basis for existence, wouldn't that include everything?
Existence for everything. It does include everything. I mean, everything. I I don't know. There is part of us like we can
Okay,
like
let me
everything
go
like
even
it's all the matter, right? Like
let
all
me go
matter.
more primary to that. Could everything be any less than everything? If everything is everything?
Sure.
Could it?
Everything be less than what?
If everything is everything,
is everything okay? So everything is everything. So
yeah.
what does it mean? Like it means like everything that exists here
Everything.
is
Everything.
everything that possibly can be.
Everything that exists that we're not even thinking exists.
Okay.
Would be included in everything. All things.
Okay.
So all things would be all things, right? So that would be the same for all people and all things. All things and all people would be part of all things.
Sure.
Not apart from it. And they couldn't be any less. It would just I'm pushing the concept of the horizon being the edge of the world. And now we're looking at that horizon as being the limit of the thinking we're doing and starting to see that beyond the limits of the thinking is where everything begins. It's not where anything ends. There's always, if there's a limit, there's always something limiting it that's unlimited for it to exist. And that unlimited nature can't be exclusive to that thing because it would also have to be inclusive of that thing, so that all things would be part of everything. And so when we talk, we can speak to everyone in our present state by admitting and conceding that we are all part of the exact same thing in essence, not how things appear, not how things can be described, not how things we can think about, not how they can be
so
talked
we're in
about.
it.
We are of it, not even in it.
Yeah, we're of it.
In it would
it's
mean
part of us.
Yeah, it's the inherent nature of our existence, our essence.
Okay. So
yes.
what? Okay.
All right. So you and I share that. So if we know what we know in that regard that isn't reasonable, anything we think is true is going to use reason to justify defending against that broad thought.
Not necessarily for me.
I understand, but the thoughts that do react are actually reacting to the awareness of this seeming challenge because they're beginning to actually reveal the defensive nature of those limited thoughts by beginning to consider something so broad as to begin to eliminate the hallucination that we've been perpetuating in the thoughts that we called real and true by noticing them in the same way that we notice the thinking we do when we feel bad and feel wrong and feel less than and feel loathsome and all those other consequences. It's just beginning to say the reactive nature of those things, the defensive nature, is actually showing us that they're defensive and they're protecting. Nothing that is true and real needs a defense because it is not at risk. There's absolutely no risk to truth and reality.
What do you mean?
Or anything
you can die. You can die. You can
what
hurt
happens
yourself.
to your body?
No, I know, but like, I mean, whatever. It can happen.
Just transforms.
But I mean, I don't know.
All right.
I personally like I don't know what would like I haven't experienced like it still exists out of the functionality of this body yet.
Yes. Well, I would say
So
you're experiencing it all the time. And
okay,
that's your knowing
but
nature.
for
The-
for for me, they call it door is closed now. You need to knock it 40 times to get open. But
Well, you know what Rumi said? Why do you think the door is closed?
because it's closed.
I know, but you're thinking it's closed. That's it. He said,
No, it's
he
not
said,
about thinking.
he
It's not
said you
about
have the
thinking.
keys.
No,
Yes,
no, no.
because the door, if it's about freedom and if it's about absolute, it's not about exclusions. It can't be anything that's exclusive,
Yeah, to get there is not the easy thing. It's like
especially when you don't think you're
it's
there right now.
no,
That's the
for
hardest thing.
example, okay, it's not about having a faith. I have the strongest faith about most abstracted vision of I've heard about any human being so far. But is to having faith on the door is open is one thing, and to open the door is another thing. To open the door, you need to spend time. You need to put effort. You need to do a lot of like I like if you're in the point that you can have faith on anything and open any door, so you're God. Congratulations.
That
If you
would
have
be our essence.
if you have a potential to be a God, different story that who are you now? To get to the level of power of that you have a faith on opening any door, and in that moment you open that door, welcome to the kingdom.
So, but you're suggesting that that infinite power doesn't happen to be infinite where you are right now because of what you think. Now,
No,
is
I'm
that
not.
possible?
No, I'm just
There's no faith in
you know
this.
there
And
is like I think there are logic. It's again like I'm reasoning and thinking. It's just a matter of it can be good, and it can like it can like take us to the darkest point. It can like help us to get to the like thing, and like for me, I'm not that point yet, not because of I don't want to be that point. I don't have a faith that I can be there. It's
yes,
just
I
a
know.
matter of time, like the
I'm
pregnant,
hearing
they
all the
say.
reasons you're using to justify you're not there. So I recognize
Yeah,
that.
because it takes like 9 months for a woman to give birth, like pregnancy for any, that is a part of nature, is a time you need to feel in to become to that maturity and that realization
Yes,
that
that is part of human nature. That is not part of a being nature. A being nature doesn't have a beginning or an end. It
a
doesn't
human
function in.
nature is part of being. I don't
Yes,
separate them.
yes. Okay. And yet we are functioning in bodies that we call our own,
Mhm.
seemingly separate. We have our own choice within that body. We seem to be a product of that being nature. And if we think of that being nature as something other than what it is, that would be a major collision in our capacity to function as humans productively and functionally. And that's what the conversation's about. We are so attached to reason and logic. You even referred to logic as happening to you, that logic happens as though you're not the one creating the logic that you're using to justify the thinking you're doing. You're choosing those thoughts and that logic. And to think within reason is to think what brains do, which is thinking, and knowing in an absolute sense does not think. It knows. It has nothing to think about. So there is no self in that. There is no being nature that isn't absolute.
Actually, I don't see. I just see thinking as a one like sense. I don't give that much credit to thinking. Actually, like I mean, like thinking is like it's just the one thing that you can
Okay.
make us operate in just the realm of being. Like when you're listening to a music and move your body, you're if you're very in tune in it, it's just thinking. It doesn't involve like. It's just maybe like some part of that neuron get fired, but I'm
Have
not
you
like
ever
like I did
have you ever danced when you've been in one of those anesthetic states? Anesthetized states?
dance. I don't remember. Probably not, because otherwise the surgeon wouldn't do the surgery.
So I'm making suggestions here. I don't know biologically, physiologically, anatomically if I'm correct,
Mm-hmm.
but my suspicion is that all voluntary actions start with a thought, regardless of whether we're flowing with the thoughts and feeling we're not thinking or not. Every time I do this with my arm and raise my hand, there's thinking involved in that. It doesn't just happen to me, it's actually being caused by me. Every time I'm using logic, every time I'm thinking who I am is who I am, that's all a choice of thought that I am actually manifesting.
I disagree.
Yeah. So the consideration here is to begin noticing in between this discussion, the next one.
It's not always, like it happened, but it's not always the case. I think
Okay,
there is an instant
while
like
you
this thinking it doesn't involve.
While you spend the time in between this conversation and the next, start noticing if you ever do anything that you're not present for, and start doing anything that you don't think about.
Start doing what? So would you repeat again?
Start doing anything where you're not. If you ever start anything any other place than where you are.
Start doing any other place that I am.
Start realizing that everything you do is always starting where you are, always. So you're always present.
Okay.
And everything you do in some way is connected to what you're thinking. Every choice you make to make a move, to do something.
That is, yeah, but is not, I mean, like, I can think like that, but it not healthy. I don't think it's like a beneficial to me. Like every action I see, I did think about like I'm doing this, but a lot
I agree with you.
So that is, you're feeding that like that sense actually more that way of like.
I'm just asking you to begin. You're claiming that you don't think about everything you do. And so the thing you're claiming not to do by thinking about your thinking that's so hard would certainly be made harder if what you're thinking you're doing isn't what you're doing. And that conflict would be fairly obvious in the consequences you face and the experiences you have.
Like most of the time this is the case, but I think for a lot of scenario is not like about time, like for like the music thinking, if I heard like a very beautiful music, right? Like masterpiece that like it just hit like my emotion, I will cry.
Okay.
And when I'm crying, that action that I've been doing is caused by something externally that not necessarily I'm thinking about anything that I'm crying. The thing it's happened is like I'm not thinking about crying and cry. They make decision to cry. It just happen and activate that part and I'm crying as a consequence of that. And I don't think anything about thinking involved that much.
Okay. So you're helping me make some of the point that I'm heading toward here. And this is sort of toward the end of this discussion, and it's something to consider.
I have to leave kind of soon because I like 10 minutes.
You got it. So here's the point. We think that the only things we're thinking about is what we're thinking about, and that we're not thinking about anything that we're not thinking about. And yet we talk about our subconscious as being something that we know exists, and yet claim we don't know what's going on in that subconscious and feel caught off guards by things that we didn't think we were thinking, when in fact we must have been thinking them the whole time when we thought we weren't thinking them. And the consideration here in between this conversation and the next is to begin to look at what might seem laborious, but can't be any more laborious than maintaining thoughts that aren't true as though they're true, to begin to just watch and witness the fact that you're very much present to what's happening wherever you are, and that thinking is always the source of the conflict with what you have with what's happening. It's not what's happening, because what's happening has always happened and will always happen and is always happening wherever we are, as everything is happening right now. So there's no conflict in that. It's only what we think should be happening, should have happened, might have happened, could have happened, how we would be if those things had happened that didn't happen, that we struggle with. And I want to point out that this idea of beginning to concede that we have kept thoughts we don't want to be responsible for in this darkness of what we call the subconscious is the same concept that drives us to make believe that this knowing source that we can't seem to identify either exists or doesn't exist based on my faith, my hope, my trust, my agreement that it exists, when in fact, the only thing that is ever complicated by denying the infinite source existence is my thinking. It does not affect that infinite source at all. It does not affect my essence or your essence or anyone's essence. It simply affects my thinking and what I do as a result, which ends up creating conflict that I use to justify a distraction in a way that causes all those kind of chemical reactions in my body that create this seeming emergency that I've manifest simply to distract myself from the fact that I'm thinking in ways that aren't true and making believe they're true. So it's contemplation. And an awakened contemplation, I would say, is our normal state, which is a contemplative meditation. And when I begin interacting with the world and notice how prone I am to react to things that I don't like and have ideas about things that really have no basis in what I'm attempting to accomplish, I can begin to see how fractured I am in my own state of thought to begin to take this absolute infinite knowing nature and express it in ways that are dysfunctional and not helpful and not useful. And to make believe the best thing I can do is not feel those things, is to make believe that I should continue doing those things and get better simply at ignoring those things and not notice that that's the source of ignorance and denial and delusion and defiance and defense. So it's a contemplation. A chance to look at what you may not think is true. And I would say when you're thinking things aren't true, those are the things to look at.
Yeah, for sure. All the time. I take a look.
Thank you for your time today, Moein.
For sure. Thank you so much. It was fun, like always.
We'll continue. So now contemplation this is the in-between of our three conversations. The beginning happened, this is the middle, the next one's the end. So this will be our story.
For sure.
Beginning, middle, and end we're creating.
That's
so
the beginning.
The next one we're going to look at what has come of all this. What has happened to what I find is that I have a lot of shortcomings in my ability to communicate this. I have a lot of insistence on being heard. I have a lot of ideas that are obviously weak for me to be operating in ways that I feel demanding and insistent, rather than just begin to discuss it. And if it's true, it's true. And if I know that, then I would operate on a basis of peace rather than any kind of demand or insistence. And I don't always do that. So I have a fractured state of ability in that regard, which I discover every time I do this and every time I listen to what I do, especially when I listen, because then I'm not busy trying to figure out what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So then I can start looking at what I said and say, what the hell? But if there's a shortcoming, that's okay. I've learned. Those are the guidance. Those are the guidance to what I can begin noticing. And in the noticing, the wisdom of what to do becomes better and more natural than me constantly thinking about, I have to abuse myself and demand something out of myself to act better, when in fact the action I'm taking against the self I think I am is not a better act, but simply an act anyhow. It's literally just a promotion of an act, like a actor on a stage. It isn't real. It isn't true. It's just a choice I've made to wear certain characters and play certain roles. And when I think in those terms, I just seeing, oh, it's a choice. I can do anything I want. I've been doing anything I wanted the whole time. I've just been denying I was doing it so that I could act as though I was a victim to what I was doing, rather than claim the decrepit consequences that I created were actually, in fact, exactly what I intended, to get my attention, to begin to actually have the perspective to see that what I was doing wrong was actually a clear understanding I had about what I was thinking that was wrong, and what I was unwilling to let go of because I was addicted to the idea that somehow I needed to continue to defend it, rather than simply say, oh, that's telling me, by virtue of the discontent and the irritability and the restlessness and the anxiety and stress and contempt I'm feeling and condemnation I feel, the aloneness, that I'm thinking something that has no basis. So it represents all those words. Love you, brother.
Thank you.
Get to where you're going.
Giving me this opportunity again.
Yeah. Get to where you're going, because you've been there all along.
Yeah, I'm gonna head to the ocean and quick swim, because it's nice. It's very sunny and
yeah. The
And
rain
then
is gone for a week.
yeah, and yeah, feel free to stop by. This is my last couple of days of freedom. So, and then I will go back to my cave and isolation.
All right. Appreciate it.
For sure.
And welcome to the end of your 40 days. And I'll talk to you at the beginning of the next round.
Yeah, that
Or
would be
before.
interesting. That would be
Love
cool.
you, brother.
Love you.
Bye.
Have a good day.